So good afternoon, everyone. This is kind of fun for me, but first I got to tell you who I am. I'm Andrew Douglas. I have this fancy title called Executive Vice Dean. I'm also an emeritus professor, which means at one point I really did something interesting and worthwhile. And Mike is not sure about that still. So I'm thrilled to welcome you here to the 2025 Ilene Busch-Vishniac Lecture. It was established by a group of alumni and faculty members who wanted to recognize Ilene for her contributions to the Whiting School, specifically her tenure as dean, where she was my boss. So, fun times. So what this lecture does is it provides an opportunity for very special women. The note here says accomplished, but you know, I don't know any non-accomplished women because they deal with us men. So, but anyway, very special women to come to campus and let us know what they've been doing. Just a little bit about Ilene. She served as a faculty member at various institutions, UT Austin specifically, before coming to Hopkins in 1998, to serve as Dean of the Whiting School of Engineering, and she was the first female dean, but that, there were a group of what? There were 6 of you who became deans of engineering at the same time, right? Five. Very special people. Not easy times. Anyway, during her tenure as dean, Dr. Busch-Vishniac helped attract more research funding and emphasized an aggressive recruitment of students and faculty. Basically, she grew the school in ways which were fantastic. And there were some things that she did here which a lot of people don't notice. Just a quiet meritocracy that propelled the school ever more strongly. So that was fun to work under doing that. In fact, undergraduate engineering enrollment grew about 20%. And at that time, there were just this injection of collaborative research, which was manifested in the doubling of research centers at the time. If you think about her own scholarship, she actually has been the lead supervisor of 18 PhD students, 34 master students, and of course, undergraduates flock to her to engage in research projects. So, I'm honored here to welcome Ilene and my old buddy Ethan, which is, yeah, we're the trailing spouse, I know Ethan. Anyway, with us today, and welcome her to say just a few remarks before we get moving. Thank you, Ilene.
It is a tremendous pleasure to be here today. I've received all sorts of awards and recognition in my career. This one, having a lecture named in your honor, is the one that really sets my heart aflutter. And I am delighted always to be able to come and be here. The Ilene Busch-Vishniac Lecture was established to make sure that we were recognizing some of the incredible and, yes, accomplished, but really wonderful women who have come through the Whiting School of Engineering program. It also helps those women to be role models for those of you who are following in their footsteps. And I just wanted to say as well that it's been a long time since I was the Dean of Engineering, and I have seen some incredible changes in the Whiting School. So I wanted to just give you a couple numbers. It was well, let's see, right now, the average number of female faculty at engineering schools in the US is still a little under 20%. Here in the Whiting School, we're closer to a quarter, 24, 25%. So we're doing better. But where the numbers really show is at the undergraduate level and the enrollment. 15 years ago, the numbers of women in engineering went up. They peaked at somewhere between 25 to 27%, and they've stayed there nationwide since then. Nationwide, the average enrollment of women in engineering schools this year was 26%, a quarter. Here at Hopkins, that number is 49%, nearly double. So allow me now from the outside of the Whiting School to say kudos to the Whiting School for having established such a strong, inviting, welcoming, nurturing program that the enrollment has just about reached parity. Let me stop there because I know you didn't come here to hear me, and I will turn this back over, I think, to you, Andrew, right?
So I'm going to introduce our speaker, but thank you very much, Eileen. And, you know, these are things that are cumulative. So what you started, well, nice job. But before I get to introduce you to today's speaker, I want to tell you a little bit about Johns Hopkins. And my notes are kind of, they make me giggle because I actually spent 5 years studying Latin, and they tell me here how to pronounce sesquicentennial, which is the 150th anniversary. But anyway, yeah, okay, I can write that down in Latin as well. Anyway, so what I want to tell you guys is that this is our 150th anniversary of the founding of Johns Hopkins. And our first benefactor, Mr. Johns Hopkins, was a Quaker businessman, a wonderful philanthropist, and he donated $7 million to the founding of this university. That was the largest philanthropic gift in the history of the United States. In fact, you know, unless you amp up King Henry's gift to Oxford, it's probably the biggest in the world. Anyway, at the time, it was the largest philanthropic gift in US history. These upcoming celebratory events will culminate with the highlight of the sesquicentennial as we commemorate Founders Day, February 22nd. Of course, Founders Day was 1876, the day that Daniel Coit Gilman, someone we stole from the University of California, was inaugurated as the university's first president. We look forward to continuing to engage and connect with our local, national, and global community as we celebrate 150 years of Hopkins. I mean, this is fabulous. Anyway, now to the really important thing. I want to introduce our 2025 Ilene Busch-Vishniac lecturer, Misti Ushio. So she's managing partner at Digitalis Ventures. That's a venture capital firm that invests in solutions to complex problems in human and animal health. As a managing partner, Misti leads the firm both in strategy and investment portfolio management. And that looks like someone I should spend some time with because my investment portfolio management leaves a little bit to be desired. So when the internet started, I was one of the first people to use email. I was actually on .mil. And my wife looks at me today and she says, "You saw no commercial value to the internet?" And I said, "No, it was just for us a bunch of scientists. I mean, literally, there was no commercial value, so I never invested in anything." Well, she thinks that was not so smart. Anyway, Misti has more than 25 years of leadership in venture capital, pharmaceuticals, and early-stage life science company building. Prior to Digitalis Ventures, she founded and served as Chief Executive Officer for the cardiovascular-focused biotechnology company Tara Biosystems, and its successful acquisition last year by Valo Health. Tara Biosystems developed a physiologically relevant 3D cardiac tissue model for accelerated discovery and development of novel medicines via disease modeling and phenotypic screening capabilities. I mean, if you think about cardiovascular stuff, that's just really important because it is still the #1 disease in the United States. So people who can do that are special. She has advised and invested in life science companies to help translate their transformational science into commercially successful companies, has developed vaccines and biologics products, as well as managed the intellectual property of several scientific and engineering portfolios. So here's where we're really proud. She is the bachelor's degree holder from chemical engineering at Johns Hopkins and has a master's degree in chemical engineering from Lehigh and a PhD from UC London, University College of London. Misti, we're thrilled to have you today. All yours.
Okay. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me to give this. It's been really kind of a journey of my own putting this together, and it was really lovely to meet you, Ilene, at lunch and with the students and being able to talk to you and get your perspective. And so as I was thinking about this, I was asked to talk about my career and the different experiences I've had, and not just about what I was doing, but sort of what I learned, and also sort of what was the thought process and the decision making kind of moving from experience to experience. And what you'll see is I've had a lot of different experiences, and none of them are the same, and there's no one right answer. And I think if I want you to take anything home from this is that, you know, what's my journey is my journey, what's your journey is your journey. And if there's something in here that helps you think about your path and is helpful, that would be really wonderful. And so I kind of wanted to start with this story, and it's funny, it came up at lunch at the this idea of success. And I have two kids. They're 17 and 20, two boys. And when my older one was about 11, I would say like fifth grade, still elementary school, we're having lunch, just the two of us. And we're having like a lovely time talking about, I don't know, video games or whatever. And then he says, Mom, you know, what's your definition of success? And I was unprepared for this question, like coming from my son, who's really young. It's not like he was thinking about a job or anything. And I said, you know what, I think, actually, oops, I have slides for this. So this is us, he's asking me the question. And I said, look, I think my definition of success is that you can support yourself and that you're happy. And so you can be making a ton of money and unhappy, not successful. You can be sitting on my couch watching video games and me paying for your life, not successful. And I think when I've thought about this over the years and reflected on it, I think it still rings true, because I think it allows for a big opportunity space for what success is. Success is not just one thing. Success can be like many things. And so I feel like this was a proud parenting moment for me, that I was able to come up with this like on the fly, that has persisted. So just like a couple other grounding principles that I wanted to share, and we'll revisit some of these later. But I like to have a 5-year plan. I feel like 20 years or a life plan is like too abstract, it's too rigid, it's too much is gonna happen that will change along the way. 1 year feels too short, not enough time to actually do anything. So for me, at least 5 years has been enough time to do something. Get a degree, have a kid, do a big project, have a substantial job, experience, but with enough flexibility that as your life changes, you can sort of adjust and you can sort of modify that. And so I think it provides for some flexibility and not a lot of rigidity or feeling like you're not accomplishing what you set out to do. We all have great experiences, and we also have a lot of not so great experiences. And so I've always tried to just maximize what I can get out of a job or an experience, and for me, it's like this continuous learning. So how do I keep learning even if I don't love what I'm doing? And I think by doing that, you can kind of maximize each experience. This third one is kind of personal. It's sort of like, you know, owning your own decisions and thinking about them, being thoughtful, and then whatever happens, happens, but like you own the decision. And I'll come back to this, but I do think part of the engineering training, I think, helps with this concept of like trying to sort of state out, you know, what are the parameters you're trying to solve for, and what are you going to do? And it doesn't always work out, but that's okay. But at least you can feel confident that you made that decision for yourself. And fourth is that people matter. You know, experiences come and go, but the important people in your life persist. So often, you know, I think we think about the journey of you're born, you have a bunch of like linear experiences that are super great, and then you die, and that's like what you're supposed to do in your life. And the reality is, like, it's really not like that, and it ebbs and flows, and it goes in lots of different directions. And each one of these little symbols represents a different experience that I've had, and I'm going to walk you through most of them. And just to kind of illustrate that things change over time, and you have different points in your life, different things are important, and your decision making, you know, changes along the way. So how you feel today, you don't have to worry about feeling that way in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, because you'll be, you know, you'll be the same person, but also a person with a different set of experiences. So a couple of fun facts. I've had one husband, still married. We met here at Hopkins. He was a BME major. We have 2 kids, 2 boys. This 16,000 miles traveled as I spent most of my life on the East Coast, but have also lived in Hawaii and in London. So I kind of spanned a fair amount of geography. I like shoes. I've had a lot of shoes. And I visited at least 35 countries. I like to travel a lot, and that's been something that came out of one of the experiences that I'll talk about. And I find that an important way to learn about culture and how that reflects back on you and your own experience. So I'm just gonna kind of plow through these. I'm not gonna touch on all of it, so if there's something you see and I didn't talk about it, like just come find me afterwards and I can sort of drill down. But I actually wanted to start at high school because there are things that happened in high school that informed actually what I did at Hopkins. So the whole goal with high school is like to get to college. So that was what, like do good enough. For me, the periodic table was like the light bulb moment that was like, oh, this was like, it just clicked. I thought it was like the most, I still believe it is like the most information dense thing like ever, and I love it. And so chemistry was like it, and my chemistry teacher kind of encouraged me. She was like, you get this, you should think hard about chemistry. Something else, I mean, I kind of attributed this to my parents. So, you know, when I was in high school, it was like the 80s. And I felt like somewhere along the way, I was like, it's okay to be a smart girl. Not everyone felt that way, or not everyone felt comfortable being a smart girl. And I saw a lot of people I knew who were really smart not sort of showcase that. And not that I, you know, went out on a limb or anything, but it kind of has grounded me in my whole life. And I think that's something I really kind of established in high school. So when I think about what came next, it really came down to chemistry. And I don't know, I still don't know why, but I kind of assumed if you have a chemistry degree, you wouldn't be able to get a job right away, and you'd have to go to grad school. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to go to grad school right after undergrad. And even at 18 somehow, or 17, I knew that. And so I thought like, well, engineers should be able to get a job, so I'm going to major in chemical engineering. And that's it. That's why I majored in chemical engineering. And so here we are. So I ended up at Hopkins, which was great. I think up until building Terra, graduating from Hopkins was the hardest thing I ever did. Like seriously, like everything else was wasn't easy, but it was easier than graduating. I was not a straight A student, but I think what I learned from that was even if it feels hard or feels like maybe you're not doing like the best, actually finishing and getting that degree or finishing the project or whatever it is matters, and that's what's valuable. It's not about if you got the A or the C or the whatever, and that's important. Also, while I was here, I worked at a molecular biology lab in Mud Hall. So I was doing chemi, which was like straight up like oil and chemical, like there was no bio back then. Mike, who we'll talk about. So it was really hardcore chemi. And I worked in a molecular biology lab, and again, this is the early 90s. Biotech is just starting. Amgen, Genentech are just starting, and the age of biotechnology was about to like explode. And I was getting these 2 experiences at the right time, and it's really kind of been a foundation of my whole career. Just a couple people. So I do want to point out, Mike. So while I was kind of doing my molecular biology chemi, you were the only bio professor, one of maybe 1.5, and so I was really appreciated like your appreciation of my appreciation of like what we were trying to do, because I think we could both see it, and your support over the years has been really meaningful, and so to point out like the people you meet along the way and the people who help you and your mentors, we still are very much in touch, and it's really wonderful. And the other thing about Hopkins and people is that my best friends are the friends I met at Hopkins. So like look around, these people might be around 30 years later. They're absolutely still my best friends. And I met my husband here, which still shocks me, honestly, to this day, that you're like, oh, you're that same guy in college. Like that's weird. But this concept of combining engineering and biology was something I knew I wanted to pursue throughout my career, or at least to start. Oops, there's a slide missing, that's okay. So so my first job out of Hopkins was this really small company, and we did genetic identification for trying to identify individuals based on kind of a genetic fingerprint. It was like, this was like 94, 95. This is really, really early molecular biology techniques. And so how could you do that with like a speck of blood or a really small biosample? And so it was really interesting. The problem is, I'm sorry, the picture's covering it right now, but the people were really mean. That's why I'm not telling you what the company was. They were really mean. They weren't mean to me, but they were mean to each other, and they weren't nice, and it was a terrible environment. And I was really disappointed because I was really looking forward to like graduating and getting into the workforce. And so my lesson here was just like, don't work with mean people, like get out. And it felt weird to be like, I've been in this job for like, I don't know, a year maybe, and I'm leaving. It felt really awkward and maybe like unsuccessful, but I was like, this is just not good. Barclay, husband, not yet husband, doing grad school in Philadelphia, so I'm like, I'll just go to Philadelphia. So went to Philadelphia, got a job at Merck, and ended up in this group, this wonderful group called Bioprocess R&D, and we developed the manufacturing processes for the vaccine. So it was this unbelievable like group of molecular biologists, biochemists, and chemical engineers. And so these two things were very disparate at Hopkins was all of a sudden like a team, and it was like wonderful. And I still believe in like the multidisciplinary teams are going to get you further than a team that's just kind of like monodisciplinary. The other thing I learned at Merck was that it's a really big company. And I didn't realize this at the time, but after building a company and being in a lot of small companies, there's value to understanding how large companies work. There's processes, there's just stuff that you have to do to run an organization that size that I appreciated later when you don't have any of it, like in a startup, and it's like, oh, that's why they do these things. So that was something a little after the fact. Also during this time I had my first kid. No, I didn't. This is different. Sorry, the little person icon is supposed to remind me that there's an important person. That person is Barry Buckland. You know Barry. He was head of the group, and he was the one that encouraged me to do a PhD. So I ended up through a Merck very, very generous fellowship being able to take a leave of absence from Merck, and they continue to pay you to go get a PhD in what was then called metabolic engineering, which is now kind of called synthetic biology, but the concept of can you sort of manipulate bacteria, the genetics of bacteria, to make them make something more efficiency, in this case, antibiotics. So can you make the bacteria that make antibiotics more effective and efficient from a manufacturing standpoint? And it was an amazing experience to go to London. And so Barry encouraged me to go to London because they have entire biochemical engineering departments with all of the infrastructure and the equipment that we tend to not so much have here in the United States. So but I got the PhD, but like more importantly, living in London, we traveled literally around the world, and it was a huge eye-opener. I hadn't traveled that much, and I didn't quite realize we live in a really, really large, isolated country here, and I didn't quite realize that until going where you can go from country to country, language to language, and culture to culture, and over many continents, and just how it sort of informed me as like what a global citizen is versus a US citizen versus a national citizen, whatever. And that was the biggest learning, but it was good to get the PhD along the way. So then, needed to move back. So Merck, because they paid for my education, like I had to go back, and I had to go back to either the Philadelphia site or they have a New Jersey site. And at the time, Barclay wanted to stay in academia and become a professor, and so it was pretty limiting. So this is getting ahead, but like as you're navigating life with another human, those pushes and pulls and priorities become a big input into where things land. So he ended up I will never forget this, we were in an internet cafe in Thailand back when you had to go check your email like in an internet cafe, which I don't think any of you know about, but he can tell who knows. And he got a tenure-track position at Columbia. And I was like, all right, we're moving to New York. I can go to Rahway, you're gonna go to Columbia, and we've been in New York ever since, and it's really great. So I go back to Merck, And I operate like a small scale fermentation facility, which means like, I don't know if you know fermenter, like the 20 liter, it's like this big, like, I don't know, maybe not quite as big as this room, but like half the size. And it's just like fermenter after fermenter. And we made all kinds of stuff that bacteria or fungus made. And it was super fun and cool. But I sort of had this like bad light bulb moment that was like, wow, I really don't want to run a lab. Like, I got the PhD, but I don't actually want to do the science thing every day. And so that was a little bit of a bummer because I really thought I'd be at Merck forever because I really liked the company. It was great. But that was like that was sort of a hard realization. And that took me a long time to sort of like work through to decide what to do. Like, do I go to a different job within Merck? Do I leave? What do I do? This is where I had kid one, 2005, during this time at Merck, just as other inputs to life going on. And so like kind of the big lesson here was like, Merck was this really smart, slow, big thing that just kind of got too big and slow for me. And I was like, I need to leave. And it was a really hard decision, but it was totally the right decision. But I felt bad about that because they were so generous and supportive. But it was sort of like I can't spend the rest of my career here. So that was a tough one. I ended up taking a job at Columbia University in their tech transfer office. So I know there's some people from JHTV here. I don't know if all of you have interacted with this group, but you should if you haven't. But they really work and manage the intellectual property of the university to really try to move it into society so that innovation and inventions that are happening here actually get, that the rest of the world gets benefit from that through different types of transactions. And so I did this at Columbia, and it was really my first exposure to commercializing innovation, which turned into kind of what would be the focus of the rest of my career. So it was really important position, even though I wasn't there for very long, to kind of get exposure to that. And kind of what happened was through investors that were coming to Columbia to learn about technology, I met this group, this VC group called Harris & Harris, and they offered me a job. And I hadn't been there for very long, but they're like, come join our venture capital group here in New York City. And I'm like, okay, like I don't know anything about investing, but I was like, I can't pass this up. And I think the big message here in an abstract way is like sometimes like these jobs that you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and it's okay, but they could lead to something else that you just don't know about. And until you make that jump, you don't know what's next. And like there's that piece, and there's the other piece, which is like, hey, you might want to go here, but maybe from A to B, you can't really do that. You may need to go from A to B to C to get there. But I'm calling them transition jobs. It's not really the right thing, but these jobs that sort of help you either get the skill sets or the network or the exposure to the next thing can be really valuable. And so don't overlook those, because they can actually move you maybe to a better outcome or faster outcome. So it takes this job, and all of a sudden my life goes from science and technology and learning and creating new knowledge to like finance and investing. And all of a sudden I realized, like, if you have money, you have outsized influence, and that's the way the world works. And I was like, wow, okay, that's good to know. It was kind of like a little rough coming from like the science technology, but it was a good learning kind of for the going forward. But I learned a ton. I learned finance, I learned business, I learned how to sit on a board, how to be a director, I learned how to do investing, I learned capital markets. I had another kid, kid 2. That was a rough like balance of that job and learning and having 2 kids. And the Charlie Harris, who hired me, just wanted to call out him because he was definitely older and really invested in young people and really put a ton of trust and basically turned over the firm to us. So it was kind of like dad and the kids. Dad retires and your brother, in this case, takes over. We were running this publicly traded investment fund when we were like in our late 30s. Like, sometimes I wonder like if that was a good idea or not, but it was a really amazing, and Charlie set that up for us and gave me a chance to sort of move in this direction, which I probably would have been really hard to just go and jump into something like this. From Harris & Harris Group, I wanted to invest in a biology company, 3D biology, printed biology, like whatever biology. And I was looking for technology, and I came across this cardiac tissue engineering project out of Columbia and the University of Toronto that basically recapitulated heart physiology. And there was no company, so there was nothing to invest in. And so our team said, Misty, why don't you just like start it up and let's like take it for a spin. So it was never really my life's goal to like be a CEO and start a company, but it just happened. So I was like, okay. So we started the company, we got the IP, we put some money in, and then it started to kind of run. And at some point, it became clear that I couldn't run my portfolio at Harrison Harris Group and run a company, and I had to decide. And so I was like, am I going to find a full-time CEO for this, project company that I've been building and started, or I'm going to leave the investment fund and go all in Terra. And so also around this time, I'm probably early 40s or so, and I was like, kind of like, what am I, I've had all these experiences, like I probably need to do something with all of these experiences. And that was kind of in the back of my mind. And when this opportunity came along, I was like, this is really like the perfect way to combine Merck, Columbia, investing. And so I decided to do it. So I quit my job at the investment firm, and I went all in as CEO at Terra. And I really like loved it. I was surprised actually how much I loved it, because I didn't really know what I was getting into. And it's totally different from like an investor. Where you have a portfolio on purpose. So you're doing a little bit in a lot of things, and you're kind of monitoring it from here, and you're like, things that are going fine are fine, and the things that aren't going well, you're paying attention to, and then, you move around. But you're always a little bit at arm's length. And so it was like fundamentally different being a CEO, and there's lots of different similar contrasts, is that all of a sudden every little decision was towards a common goal to like have this company succeed, whether it was what was the waste management system we were going to do, who we're going to hire for BD, who are our junior scientists, what's our HR plan, and so on and so on and so on. And so that was just really interesting, and I was very motivated by that, and just just like constant. It was just all about, everything was about like how to make this company successful, all the little details. The other, I guess, light bulb moment or something I want to share, and again, you can abstract this out, but I would always say like, oh yeah, CEO, you're trying to like play chess. So you have this like board, and you've got the pieces, and you're like strategy, and you're like gonna win, and you're gonna like do that. And then, but reality, you're like playing Tetris. And so you have all this stuff coming down at you really fast. And you're like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? And I have to like get this thing here before like the whole thing blows up. And that's what it feels like to be a CEO. And the challenge, and I think you can extrapolate this to like other, things in your life, is like trying to find the balance of like dealing with the Tetris, which is like your everyday crazy, and actually taking the time to be like, okay, wait, but what game am I playing here? Like, what is the strategy? Like, what am I trying to do? And anyway, I leave you a little bit with that, like when you feel like you're playing Tetris, to be like, okay, like when do I get to play chess? Or let me think about that. I have one slide on the company, and if you want to learn more, come find me, I'll tell you more about it. But essentially at Terra, what we were trying to do is we're saying like that like snake thing is the drug development process. It's slow, it costs a ton of money, and the probability of success is really low. So we're all like in pharma, like, what are we doing? This model is like not sustainable. Everyone's freaking out about it. No one has a good solution. So we said, well, what if you could test new medicines on physiologically relevant biology before, like really, really early in the process, so you can get a read on what's not gonna work and get rid of it, and what's going to work and get that to move along. And so we did this in cardiac. So this is a video of the cardiac tissues that we would make in the lab. We'd make like thousands of these. And they're three-dimensional, you can't tell from this video, and they're suspended, and they beat, and they pull on those wires, and we can measure force. So we were able to measure very specific physiological relevant parameters around how your heart beats and how drugs affect that. Again, I can talk more in detail if you're interested later. We had kind of a 4-part business model. So like in the circle, so the yellow is the platform, that's the tissues. The green is the data. Essentially, we generated data, we sold data. And we had two kind of interactions with pharma. One is we had a pharma services, so pharma would send us their compounds, we would test them as per what agreed upon, and then we'd basically give them back the data, we'd sell them back the data. We also had our own internal, so instead of enabling other companies to advance their molecules, we started to develop our own, so that's the blue. And essentially the goal was, can we take this like very long, low probability of success situation in pharma and condense it and increase the probability of success? That was like the overarching goal. So that was what we were doing. And then we got the technology basically to an inflection point where we had de-risked, it worked, and we could make healthy disease models. And we were trying to decide what to do about the pharma services business and the drug discovery. And then Valo, who was one of our partners, just wanted to acquire the whole thing. They didn't want to have the discussion around like drug discovery versus pharma services. We were thinking about splitting them and on and on. And they said, no, we want your biology. We need your biology. We want to buy it. So we're like, okay. So wasn't really prepared for the company to get acquired, but it was great. It was a great fit. It was bigger, but not like super big. So our team was meaningful. They took the whole team. I'm the only one that didn't go. And they're all still there, and it's thriving. They did a big deal with Novo Nordisk, and it was like a kind of a hard decision, like, do we keep going, which would require scaling it, which would have been hard, trying to get the costs down, which would have been hard. It was very expensive. So anyway, it got acquired in 2022, and it's been a very successful acquisition. I then went to the beach. We have a little place in Montauk, if any of you have been there. It's like the very tip of Long Island. It's lovely. There's literally like no people. Like if there's 10 people on this beach, it's crowded. It's so nice. And I realized this is nice. I love the beach, but like I need to be doing something. I pretty much had like an identity crisis of like not having a job. And I was like, okay, that's not good. Meanwhile, the founder of Digitalis Ventures, who I've known for a long time, he's part of the VC ecosystem in New York, calls and like, what are you doing? Because I'm tripling my firm. I need help. I don't even know what I need help with, but I need help. Come help me. And I was like, all right, what are you doing? And what's been really interesting about Digitalis is, he has this like pretty big vision that hadn't totally been realized. So there's the venture funds. There's about $1 billion under management where we invest in early stage technology. So there's like Digitalis Ventures, there's Digitalis Commons, which is the not-for-profit. It's a different entity. And that was interesting because he's like, look, at the time, he hadn't, because of COVID, there wasn't a lot going on. He's like, come and join and we can figure out what to do with this. I was like, okay, well, that's new, because I hadn't really thought about, well, what if you don't need a venture size return? It creates a different opportunity space for projects and investments. And then third is this concept of Digitalis research, which is, just topics of interest that we can kind of incubate or think about or be engaged with that doesn't require a venture investment or even like a commons investment. And actually we're doing some stuff with Hopkins on this, and that's been really cool. And so what's been really fun with Digitalis is like, I feel like I've been able to take all of these experiences and help build this firm, both from sort of a company building aspect, which I really loved from Tara, from a CEO mentorship. Like I sit on a bunch of boards, I help first-time CEOs and not first-time CEOs, like help navigate, building their business. We have through the Commons a big partnership with ARPA-H, which is a whole different topic. And what I've kind of realized more recently is that this idea of thought leadership or talking about things that might be a little controversial or more controversial than I would have been comfortable with in the past are now like, yeah, let's talk about that. So like one project is around this concept around why doesn't venture invest in women's health? I mean, we do a little bit, but not to the extent that you might think, given that women are a enormous market. It's like 2%, it's really low. So trying to like explain like what's going on there and unpacking like why is it hard for venture, what are some things, and then what could government do? Can policy help? There's been a lot of things government could do. Another one that's pretty interesting is this concept around antibiotic security. So we don't make antibiotics in this country or in the EU anymore. And so should we be thinking about that? What's the risk of that? How can technology help? How might we think about it as a country? Because those decisions get made at a company level. And so writing something actually with Barry on this. So that's fun, and it kind of builds off, many years of like experience, but not really like thinking about it from a, here's what I think, or here's something that is provocative and what's been in the past, like here's the data, and we're going to move it forward. So this is where I am, this is what I do, this is my day-to-day, and I feel really lucky that I get to sort of apply pretty much everything I've learned along the way at Digitalis. So just to kind of, I think, tie a couple things together. One is, like, I think another overarching, I guess, theme as I think about when I make any decision, whether it's a job decision or otherwise, I try to kind of come up with a set of criteria. Like, I have a gut feel, and then I'm like, well, let me set a set of criteria, let me rank them, let me maybe weight them. I mean, you can do all kinds of things to see if like your gut and your brain are kind of like in sync. So these are a couple of mine. Again, they change, like, what's the long-term potential value of this experience? What's the day-to-day gonna be like? Who are the people you're gonna work with? Is it flexible? Is it compatible with your personal life? Again, which changes, constantly. What's the compensation? And so I like this because, you have your own set of criteria, but I think what's helpful for me is there's no black and white, there's no experience, no new job is gonna be perfect. It's just not, because one of these things isn't gonna be able to be fulfilled. You might get 2 of them, or it might not even matter. It might be like, the only thing I need to focus on right now is compensation, because I've got 3 little kids at home, and I just need a job that pays as much as possible, and I'll deal with the rest of it later. Or maybe it's the total opposite of like, I just want a really nice everyday experience, and like I don't care what the rest looks like, But I think that's for you to figure out, and to figure out what is even your criteria, and just to realize, like, as you're thinking about it, not all things are going to be satisfied, and that's okay. And like, it's going to change over your life, and that should be expected. And it gets back to like having a 5-year plan versus a 20-year plan. And maybe, actually, I'm just thinking about this right now, maybe the 5-year plan, maybe why that makes sense is because like your life is semi-stable in 5 years, but like 10 years, like dramatic things can happen, something like that's not catastrophic. Where you can kind of like think about, yeah, I can make a decision based on a 5-year time horizon, because I don't, maybe I'm not having kids for 10 years, so I don't have to worry about that. But if I have to factor in like that at the same time, where I'm trying to like pay for an apartment or something, I don't know. So I think like the point is, try to dissect what's important to you at the time, and don't think too far ahead where it all starts to get like falling in on itself. I think this provides flexibility, and where you don't end up in a position where you're like, I'm not meeting my goals. I think it's really important, that's because you will meet your goals, you guys are gonna be awesome. But like feeling like you're always moving ahead, something around like a 5-year plan, that helped me. Going back to this like always learning, it's really kind of another way to say it is like, don't get bored. But also try, like don't give up. But even when you're like maybe a little bit bored, is there a way to like be proactive on a new experience? But when you do, when you've maxed it out, and I'll tell you that's what happened to me at Merck, I was like, it's time to move on. I'm gonna come back to own your own decisions. People matter. The good ones are gonna be there for your lifetime. Jobs come and go. So just, pay attention and make time for like the important ones, and accept help when people are offering it to you, and also like help other people, because I think what goes around comes around for sure. I wanted to come back to own your own decisions because I feel like this is definitely something I attribute to engineering, whether or not that's true or not, and it's not at the belittlement of any other discipline, but I have this very clear image or this memory of like being in class. Do you guys even use blue books anymore? Taking exams, doing problem sets, yeah. And you have this like ridiculous equation that you have to solve in like transport or whatever, and you can't solve it. It's like unsolvable. So you have to make assumptions that say like, okay, I'm gonna assume this, and this term goes to 0 or whatever, but you have to simplify the problem based on assumptions, and you have to write those assumptions down, and then you solve the problem. And what that has translated to me over my career is that the thought put into what those assumptions are help you own the outcome. Like, so, like, are you following me? So if I'm like, I want to do this job, if you go back to the criteria for these reasons, and I take that job and it goes really great, it's like, great. And if it doesn't go great, it's like, well, you know what? I made that decision for all these reasons that were important, and so I'm okay with the fact that maybe it wasn't great or whatever, ready to move on. I think the other thing that, and I don't know if this is true, but I attribute it to this process, is the other thing, because you have to make assumptions. Assumptions by definition are not facts. We don't really know if they're right, which intrinsically implies risk, and that we have to take a little bit of risk. Like, we're kind of taught, like, you sort of have to do this uncomfortable thing of like putting something down that may or may not be 100% true to actually solve the problem. And so when you abstract that to work or other things in life where you're like, okay, we have to move this forward. So we just have to do that. We have to make the best guess we can, or else we're just going to sit here and stare at each other all day. And that's not helpful. And I think some people struggle with that. And I think, there's some disciplines that are very linear. You do this, you get this, you evaluate this, you move on to the next thing. And if you don't have that next set of data or whatever, it's really hard to move forward. And it's it's a big leap of faith. And I think there's a pretty distinct training that goes on through this process of like the problem solving for engineers. And which is also why I think the multidisciplinary teams are really important, because you kind of get the best of both trainings and thought processes. So that to me is very much an engineering result. And then just to sort of finish with this, I do still like laugh that this still is like very relevant to be able to support oneself and be happy. I think support now, when I reflect on it, for me, I was talking to Clay about it, it was, you need to pay for your life, like you need to support yourself financially. Now, when I think about it, in a bigger picture, it's not really just financially, but it's also like, supporting your growth, supporting your learning, supporting your ability to take care of your family, supporting your community. It's a broader sense of support, that I think can be really rewarding. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Misti Ushio. So I gave you a little bit of introduction. Obviously, it was a pale shadow of what the real. With that, any questions for our guest speaker today? Misti, you see, I'm a nerd at heart. So can we go back to your little beating?
Yeah.
So you got to tell me what the sarcomeres are and what the Z lines are doing and all that kind of stuff.
I'm not going to be able to do that. But what I can do, what I can do is.
So how big is that thing?
So it's like 3 millimeters.
Okay.
It's 100,000 cells.
See, magic number. 100,000 cells in a.
Like, it's in the, like the microtiter plates.
Yeah,
like
and the bath is giving it's giving
so
nutrients.
So the key elements here, so there's media that's feeding it, but the key elements, all right, so I'll go back. So, all right, this is the science lesson. So heart cells don't divide, and so from a scientific standpoint, it's hard to have cells to experiment on. And so induced pluripotent cell technology, which allows you to create different types of cells from skin or whatever, you can make cardiac cells. It's a big breakthrough. It said, oh my God, now we can study heart in the lab. Problem was those individual cells don't actually act like our hearts. They kind of beat, but they don't actually, you need the whole thing working as a muscle. And so that's what we did, is we took those cells and we electrically and mechanically stimulated them, like what happens when we're in the womb. to create, which you can't see, but the physiology and this little forest graph coming at the end. And so by measuring the deflection of those wires, we could measure a lot of different parameters about the heart. And so that's the technical lesson for the day.
So I think this is actually more important in that Misti gave us this easy breezy view of what she's done, but actually there's real substance behind everything that she's done, and none of this is something that comes easily. I mean, I know how hard this stuff is. I used to look at the way the heart beat, and it was really very interesting. Anyway, any other questions from people? Yes.
So I know before you started your own company, you worked at Merck. I was wondering like how did you get the funds or like the resources or? Say that again?
So the question, how do you get the resources to start your own company? Yeah.
Oh, the funding? Oh, like how did it, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So that everybody else can hear the question. Hi, great presentation. My question was, I know before you start your own company, you worked at Merck, and I was just wondering how did you get the funds and resources to start your own company? Like, how did you hire people? Like, how was that process like?
Yeah. So I'll tell you how I did it, which isn't super normal, and then I'll tell you how most people do it. So before I started Terra, I was at the investment firm, and so I actually started it with the funds from the investment firm, which is highly unusual and very lucky. And yes, it's a very fortuitous. I gave up equity for that. Like there's some give and take, but I was able to do this in a less risky situation than normal. So the technology came from professors who I had met, and so the technology I found at universities. But the funding came from the fund that I was working at. So I didn't go straight from Merck to Terra. It was from the investment company. And so it was the investment company that invested in it. What normally happens, which is not that, unless, I mean, nowadays there's more and more funds starting companies. So it's the trend has changed dramatically, actually, in the past 15 years. But entrepreneurs, it's a slog, and you go and you meet with investors and you try to get seed financing. There's programs, and what a lot say, and like in Baltimore and Hopkins, there's programming to try to get that little bit of money to get started that allows you to get to the next bit of funding. So if that little bit of money is $100K or $200K, and that gets you to $1 million or $2 million, that gets you to the point where you can start to go to more institutional investors. But I think nowadays these sort of local pools of money are like crucial for entrepreneurs who are really starting out. And so places like JHTV and other entrepreneurship organizations and communities tend to have like information about, so you don't have to start from scratch, and that's really kind of the start. So it's a good question, but I do want to point out like my experience for that was unusual. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So you started out as a chemical engineer, but you've ascended to more managerial roles and being a CEO of your own company. And while it's still in the space of engineering and life sciences, do you feel a bit withdrawn from the impact of your work or your roots as an engineer?
I definitely don't do engineering, but I still identify as an engineer, so it's weird. So I'll give you another example. Same kid, same lunch, different experience. So my husband, like I said, he's a biomedical engineer. He's a professor of bioengineering at Columbia. So he has a lab and he does this thing, it's neurotrauma. Anyway, someone was over and someone asked either us, or I don't know if they asked Clay, what do your parents do? And he said, Dad's a scientist and Mom used to be a scientist. And I was like completely offended by this on multiple levels. And I realized like his perception was like, I don't do science anymore, and therefore I'm not a scientist. And I took a lot of like personal affront. And I think because like I foundationally like consider myself an engineer, like, yes, I really don't do a lot of math anymore, or I don't do science, but I think, kind of back to this training, and I think the way I think I think, like an engineer. And I think that actually permeates kind of every day what I do. So, yeah.
Hi, Dr. Ushio. Thank you for your presentation. I'm currently an undergrad and thinking about grad school, debating to do it or not. So I wanted to hear from your experience, like how much do you think a PhD adds on to your career advancement? Like, I guess from two levels, like the biotech entrepreneur like route and also like the biotech VC route.
Yeah, I mean, so you're going to get different answers from different people. I'll just say from my standpoint, the PhD has been unbelievably valuable. And I think it's like, I think it's sort of like, it's a level of credibility you don't have to fight for walking in the door, which maybe isn't the reason to do it because it's a slog and it's a lot of work and it takes a long time. But either whether you're in VC or whether you're in corporate or you're at pharma or anywhere, in some cases it's kind of required to move up, unfortunately. Say like in large pharma, you really need one. In VC, you don't, it's not required, but it's like, it sets you apart. And so I think if you don't want to get a PhD, don't get one. You'll be miserable is pretty much is what I think. But if you're on the fence or you think you might want to, and you think, okay, if I don't want to go into academia, what's the value? I think there's absolutely value for a PhD. I didn't go to grad school right away. I worked for, I don't know, 5 years or something before going to grad school. So I was definitely like older, but that time working also reinforced that I wanted to get a PhD, either because it was like I could see where I got more like real world data on like what the value of it would be. And I also think I kind of had a better idea of what I wanted to study for that amount of time. So you don't have to go right away, but I think, you can always re-enter academia, I think from a job. So, but yes, there's value to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. Very interesting life journey, I would say. My question is regarding the role of mentors in your life. How many have you had? And you also mentioned that sometimes it's all about gut feeling. So, but having PhD, it was also, it was advised, I mean, in some point of time. So I was wondering, who was that key person maybe that helped you with some kind of decisions? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the managers, I would bifurcate people in this setting into like managers and mentors. There's lots of managers and some of them are good and some of them are not so good, and you can't really control that. And back to like extracting as much value out of the experiences as possible. Like I've had some great managers who really, tried to help me navigate my career and get me to places like Barry at Merck, helping me get into the fellowship program. And then I had managers that were like, if you don't publish 3 papers this year, you're not going to get promoted. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I should leave this job. So instead of kind of working with me to figure out how to be successful in that job, there was just more like, if you don't check all these boxes, like you're not going to do well. And so I kind of would say that, like, I didn't think she was a bad manager, but I think it wasn't really helpful, and it caused me, that actual experience caused me to leave Merck. So if you find yourself with a manager who's not super helpful, like it's sometimes that's unavoidable, but I think it's then like seeking out people who are, or other avenues that can sort of provide mentorship and advice, because it may not always be your manager. Some are great and some just aren't that good. And it's hard actually to be a manager, because most people tend to manage like they want to be managed versus how the person needs to be managed or will get the most value. And that's actually a really hard thing to get your head around. So yes, they might be a bad manager, but it also means they just might not have had good management training, or so it sort of cuts all ways. But I think we were talking a little bit at lunch. It's like you can only beat your head against the wall for so long on something that's not working, and then you just move on and you find a different route, you find a different experience, you find a different whatever, and you control that. And I think that's like if you get to that point, like don't go down. Like once you're here for too long, like make sure you're going in a good trajectory.
Oh, there we go. I have a question. So you've served as a mentor to all of these different boards, and I was just wondering if you could share one of the moments that you're really proud of working with and giving mentorship to others.
Yeah, I mean, one comes to mind. Like it was a portfolio company in our portfolio, and really sort of super smart PhD computer scientist doing really cool technology, and he was running out of money, and he came to present, and it was just this like really just not great presentation, and it just sort of he couldn't even focus on what he was trying to do because all the other stuff was in the way. And so I wasn't working with this company, but I was just like, can I like just go talk to this guy and try to help him figure out like how to get funding from his like current investors, and dropped in. I'm still on that board, it's still going, but it's that one was just, it was just like I just felt like I wanted to help him try to navigate. And there's a couple big themes here. One is if you do want to do this, I mean, one of the big things you need to realize is like when you're asking for money, when you're building a company on other people's money, they are like part of your family. Like they are not over here. And understanding how to work with investors and really kind of have a good symbiosis between you, the manager, entrepreneur, the money, and the technology. You can't have a company without all of those. And so there's different themes that I think come up a lot when I talk to CEOs or mentor them, and that one's a big one. I wasn't prepared for this question because I do have a whole thing on like lessons for CEOs, like talk. But that's one. Nowadays, if I get involved, usually something's not going like super great, and so I just try to go in and really try to partner with the CEOs, not be like, hey, we're like the money coming in to like take over your thing. It's like, look, we need you, you need us. How do we sort of like move this forward, kind of as a theme, and to see if that's, if there's really like a path forward for that.
So last question, and then we have the opportunity to give JC questions afterwards.
Hi, I was just wondering, you mentioned, the difference between like managers and mentors, and, maybe having some managers at certain companies who didn't work with you to find a way that you would be successful. How do you handle, weighing all these, options for different workspaces and then having them not turn out so well, if you are, stuck in some position where it's like suboptimal?
Yeah, I think it kind of comes back to some of these themes, which is, do the best you can, like try to find different angles, see if there's different routes, see if there's other people. And if there's not, if you feel like I tried this, and I tried this, and I tried this, and now we're here and there's nothing else to try, then it usually probably means it's not the right thing and it's time to move on. And that's okay, like there's a billion opportunities out there. So I'm a big believer in give it a chance. Like don't be like, I don't like this, I'm out, like give it a chance, like say do 3 iterations of, and then, but if it's not right, it's not right. And I would say I probably stayed at Merck for too long. I probably shouldn't have been there for 11 years, but that's okay. And it is what it is, and you can't look back on it. But I also think every experience has been for the most part, a better experience. I think because the more you experience, the more you kind of learn about yourself too, and what you want, what you don't want. I just an example quickly is I was talking to someone. She had 2 opportunities, a really, really small investment firm that was paying okay, and a really big consulting company that was paying well. And my natural was like, take the VC job. Those things are like rare, like what I can figure it out. But I realized like she was super risk averse. I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's not right. Maybe actually the right answer for you is to take this job, get a little settled, get some experience, and do that. So I do think it's very personal, and it's really about what's right for you. And so while yes, you should seek advice and get people's opinion, at the end of the day, this gets back to like own your own decision, own it for you, because those people aren't going to be living this job or whatever you're thinking about. You have to live it. So I think it's really important that you're comfortable with your decision. Okay, thank you very much. I'm here if you have other questions.
So my job is to say thank you to you for your questions and for being here. Very important. Thank you, Misti, for a very fun talk and very interesting answers to your questions. Ilene, thank you very much for coming again and for having this lecture. And now I have the honor of inviting you to have some refreshments at the back, and people will be here to chat with you. But once again, thank you all for being here.